Okay, good morning, everyone. Hello and welcome. Welcome, everybody, to EGPGV 2021. That is the 21st Eurographics Symposium on Parallel Graphics and Visualization. And on behalf of the papers chairs, Matt Larssen and Filip Sadlo, who is here, the student program chair, Amani Agili, and myself, I would like to welcome you to this year's workshop. So let me talk a little bit about the EGPGV mission. So the motivation for EGPGV is that there is a high demand for high-performance graphics and visualization solutions, and large data sets, very large data sets, need to be processed efficiently. So from large-scale simulations, sensing devices to real-time immersive virtual environments, and so on. So these solutions require the efficient use of parallel and distributed hardware platforms, which are all time increasing in complexity. So there's more and more to learn and more to do. So for example, increased concurrency, heterogeneity, and increased depth in memory and storage hierarchies, and so on. And so the mission of EGPGV is to foster the exchange of experiences and knowledge by exploiting and defining new trends in this area. And with our community, we want to develop novel methods for parallel and high-performance graphics and visualization. So that very briefly is the mission of our symposium. And now I'll hand over to Filip Sadlo to give you a bit more background information on the program on behalf of the EGPGV 2021 papers chairs. Please, Filip.
Hi, everybody. So we have 4 sessions today. So this is the opening and keynote session. So don't forget, the keynote starts at 9:25. Won-Ki will give us a wonderful keynote. So please attend this. Then this is followed by the flow session, which is chaired by Holger Teisel. We have also a session later on by Ken Moreland in the afternoon. Chaired by Ken Moreland. So it's a session on volumes. And the 4th session is on particles and closing. And there we'll also have the awards. So please also attend this part, and we'll have the closing remarks. So that's more or less the organization for today. By the way, I will need to speak quite a long time here because we need to fill the time to 9:25. So if you want to get a coffee, it's your turn. So basically, you might know, I think for most of you probably know that we have a somewhat different review process in EGPGV since a few years. So we have not only one deadline, we have 2 deadlines. We have an early deadline, which is in December, and we have a regular deadline, which has been in March, as far as I remember. And the idea for that is to basically resemble, on one hand, resemble a major revision review process. So you can hand in the early submission. And if your paper should not be accepted, or if you would need a major revision, then this paper is resubmitted or transitions to the regular deadline. And there you can have like the minor revision in that sense. So overall, this helped a lot, in our opinion, to increase paper quality, or at least to increase the acceptance rates, because this second review round, you know it from journal papers, whenever you have the opportunity of a major and a minor revision, the papers are typically just cleaner and stronger in the end. So we are very in favor of that. And the good thing is also this year we included even minor revisions in both cycles. So you had basically the possibility of having quite a lot of revisions and for in the end getting the paper accepted for the final deadline. So overall, we had 6 submissions for the early deadline in December, and we had 6 submissions in March. And these have been basically separate submissions. So all 6 submissions from the early deadline, they were transitioned to the regular part as in terms of minor revisions or major revisions. Well, in this case, we had only major revisions, and then underwent a minor revision during the regular deadline between March and April. So overall, as you see here, we had 8 accepts of the overall 12 submissions, leading to an acceptance rate of 66%, which made 5 papers that were full papers and 3 submissions that were accepted as short papers. I forgot to mention, we have basically called for both, for full papers and short papers. So yeah, regarding the statistics, you see here that we are a bit low, and it's of course always the chairs always ask themselves, why is this the case? And one reason that could of course be included here is the COVID situation that also led in other tracks to lower submission numbers. So this could be one explanation here, but from our understanding and from our experience, we are very positive about this two-phase review process. As said, it's kind of a major-minor review process, but the difference to all other review processes that we know is that it's a two-entry point review process. Yeah, so you can enter the review process in December, or you can enter it in March. But if you enter it in March only, then you don't have a favor of the option of a major revision. It will be just a minor revision that you could have there. Yeah, I think that's all the time I can use for this year. So let's come to the next slide, please. So the program committee consists of 19 international renowned experts in the field, and we have also the steering committee consisting of Hank, Stefan, and Christoph. So we would like to thank a lot for all the help, in particular from the IPC. So we know having only 19 persons puts some review load on the committee, and it was just wonderful. We would like to thank you very much for all the hard work that you put in, and we were really happy to see that the review quality and everything was very good. So we were really pleased about how this all worked. All right, I think then we can go to the next one, please. Yeah, so sorry for the phone call. Yeah, so the next step is to basically to thank you very much for submitting, for contributing, for attending, for being right here. If you're able, for those of you who are asleep, we will be very we thank you for watching this video, and in particular the sessions, of course, later on offline. And yeah, that's all for now for EGPGV 2021. And this brings us to the keynote, but as said, we start the keynote only at 9:25. So it's your coffee break now. Please have go to breakfast or coffee or lunch or dinner or whatever, and we'll be back in 15 minutes. Thanks.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to EGPGV. Welcome back to the keynote session and the keynote talk. It's an honor for me to introduce our keynote speaker this year, who is Professor Won-Ki Jeong from Korea University. Won-Ki is a full professor in computer science and engineering at Korea University. And before joining there, he was a professor at UNIST in Ulsan, Korea, where he also hosted an NVIDIA GPU research center. And before that, for many years, that's also the time where I know him from, he was a research scientist in the visual computing group at Harvard University, and also at the Center for Brain Science at Harvard University. He was also a visiting professor in neurobiology at Harvard Medical School. And before that, he got his PhD from the University of Utah. Won-Ki's research interests include visualization, image processing, and parallel computing. But I find it especially impressive that his research is very broad and at the same time very deep over the years. So I found that always very impressive. Won-Ki has done a lot of work in GPU-based techniques, as well as in distributed systems approaches and so on, machine learning and deep learning implemented on massively parallel and distributed architectures, domain-specific languages, and many of these things. I think this is a really impressive combination of research work. And he also did that for a large variety of applications, from visualization to neuroscience to biomedical imaging. So in his keynote today, Won-Ki will talk about high-performance visual computing for large-scale biomedical image analysis. And as I said, it's really an honor for me to have him give the keynote talk. So please, Won-Ki, go ahead, and we're looking forward very much to your talk.
Okay, thank you, Markus. It's my great pleasure to talk about my research here at the EGPGV symposium. So I guess I'm the first one from our university giving a talk in this symposium. So let me briefly introduce my institute first before we move on. So currently I'm with Korea University. As the name says, this is actually in South Korea. And this is one of the oldest universities in Korea. So our the animal representing our school is the tiger, and this is our school buildings. And since our school is very old, we also have some traditions. For example, we have like a library, like a sports game with the also one of the oldest private university, and also we have very beautiful buildings in our campus, and this is where I actually reside, College of Informatics, where all the computer science actually research is happening here. All right, and this is the my lab, High Performance Visual Computing Lab. So in short, we call HVCL, and this is founded in 2011. So this is exactly 10 years old. So this year is actually our lab has 10 years anniversary. And main research we pursue in our lab is combination of the three big categories in computer science, I would say. So first topic is visualization and computer graphics, where making nice, beautiful 3D, 2D, and 3D images. And the other one is the image processing and computer vision, where trying to get more useful information from a 2D image or video. And the last one is high performance parallel computing, where we use the architecture help to make a computation and visualize it faster. So our ultimate goal is we're going to actually develop a faster and more efficient computing algorithms to solve challenging scientific problems. So our lab's kind of slogan is kind of bridging computers and sciences, so that as a computer science, we are developing algorithms and systems that help the scientists to develop a novel scientific findings. All right, and now let's start my talk. So as the title says, today I'm going to talk about examples with very, very large size data. So we are living in an era of big data. So as you can see here, this graph is actually, I borrowed this graph from IDC report. And this is the so-called a data sphere. So this is total amount of data that mankind can generate per year. So definitely this is estimation, but as this graph shows you, the increasing rate of this data over a year is actually not linear. So it's increasing quite fast. So they expected that by year 2025, total amount of data in this world is reaching 175 zettabytes. This zettabyte is 10 to 21 bytes. It's an extremely large number, right? And in this report, they also mentioned that the total storage base will be doubling every 4 years. And this also, this doubling will be, I actually read the most recent report published last year. And due to this pandemic, COVID pandemic, still this data growing trend is continuing. So we are living in the world that the data is growing quite a bit. And as a computer scientist, especially working on visualization and image processing, actually, I want to show you some examples of a kind of a large-scale data science problem, especially in the biomedical domain. So this is one example that people actually generated a very large, huge amount of data back then. So this is so-called the Visible Human Project. So this project was actually started in 1994. I'm pretty sure that many of you in this audience know this project. So the idea of this project is to build a very, very accurate human anatomical model. So they accepted two donations, one male, the other is female, and they take very, very high resolution image from these two donators. So they use MRI, CT, and color image. And MRI, CT are each is, for example, 256 by 256 resolution with the section distance is like 4 millimeter. CT is a little higher, 512, 512, and the section distance is 1 millimeter. And cross-section color image is like 1 millimeter section with the 2K by 1K. So for the entire data set at the time, the size reaches about 15 gigabyte, which was extremely high at the time. But now we have much bigger data size compared to this. So this is example of actually neuroscience, so-called quantum projects. So Markus and I were also working on this project in the past and maybe in the current as well. So the idea of this project is to build or reconstruct the nanoscale level neuronal connections in the mammalian brain samples. And the idea is that take a brain sample and take very, very thin sections of the brain samples and take an image using extremely high resolution device, like an electron microscope, and put them together to reconstruct three-dimensional data set and do all the computational algorithms to extract useful information. For example, the neuron structures or connectivity of the neurons or so forth. So as you can see here, this is a picture of a parallel SEM scanning electron microscope actually at the Harvard University Lichtman's lab. And this is actually 61 parallel scanning electron microscope, which means it has 61 SEM altogether. So theoretically, it should be like 60 times faster than single SEM. And also, this becomes quite common these days, but they use fully automatic cutting like machine, so-called atom, and they have like a tape, automatic tape, so that they can cut the tissues like 24 hours a day, cut in automatic way and put it on this like very thin strip, and they image this automatically. So the image that they can get is something like this. So actually I grabbed this image from very widely used data set from one of the challenges. And as you can see here, we can see very detailed like neuronal structures in this image, like membranes or mitochondria or vesicles, which are not really visible in different imaging modalities. So the final goal is, once we have this extremely high resolution image, that we extract like a neuron structures or neural connections by applying image processing and computer vision algorithms. And in the end, we apply a visualization algorithms to make sense of this, all the informations, connectivity informations in the brain. So they recently actually released this data, and also they submitted this paper to journal. I guess I actually accessed this preprint from archive, bioarchive, and the size of the data is actually 2.1 petabyte in the paper. They mentioned that the size, total size, raw data size is 2 petabyte, and it took like almost a year to make this image. So it's extremely huge data we can think of. And this is another example that I also work with in collaboration with the medical doctors in the hospital, Seoul National University Hospital. So this is an example of digital pathology. So digital pathology is a discipline in the medicine that may actually examine the tissue using the digital the device, which means in the old times, they used a glass slide, as you can see here. This is actually glass, and there's a tissue stained with some kind of dye. In this case, this so-called H&E staining, which is very common in pathology, to show you the cellular structures and tumors. And the pathologists look at this glass slide using microscope, actually. So they detect whether there is a cancerous region, cancerous tissues in this glass slide. But these days, they use high-resolution scanner, as you can see here. Those are actual scanners, and they can actually make a digitized slice fully automatic. So they can load like hundreds of glass slides into one machine, and they can generate the image, digital image, 24 hours a day. And this is actual picture from Seoul National University pathology department, actually. And Professor Kyung-Bun Lee actually showed me these pictures, and they have roughly 5 the scanners and running in parallel, and they can generate up to 20,000 scans per month, which means roughly speaking, they can generate at least like 1,000 scans per day. And each glass slide can be up to like 2 gigabyte size, which is also extremely large. And they can easily reach like multi-terabyte per month. So this is also one example of a large scale data application for biomedical science. The last example I want to show you is actually the MRI. So MRI is the using the magnetic field to image the tissues non-invasively. These days, this MRI resolution is also increasing quite a bit. So in hospital, usually we usually use, for example, 1.5 Tesla, which Tesla is actually the strength of the magnetic in the MRI. Usually we have like 1.5 Tesla or like 3 Tesla or something like this. These days they have like 7 Tesla or up to 11 Tesla. So which means that they have very strong magnetic field so that they can increase the resolution and also they can increase the signal to noise ratio. So for example, this actually I grabbed this data from a scientific data, a paper from the Scientific Data Journal. So this example, they use a whole brain, ex vivo whole human brain, and they use 7 Tesla MRI to make a 100 micron isotropic resolution MRI. So it took like 100 hours to make this image, and raw data, case-based data, which is frequency data, is roughly about 8 terabyte. So this is also extremely large scale examples in the biomedical science. As you can see here, for example, in the connectome example that I just showed you in the earlier, if you want to do this in, for example, imaging all the required slide and store everything in the disk, and then we're going to process everything as post-processing, then we have to wait 1 year because the imaging time took 1 year, right? So this doesn't make sense anymore. So actually I grabbed this a sentence from Kwan Liu Ma's paper, one of the earliest paper in situ actually visualization paper. In this paper, he actually mentioned that as we move into peta and exascale computing, dumping the raw simulation data in the storage and doing post-processing later doesn't make any sense. So this is actually true, because as you can see here, in this very specific example, like a simulation case, usually we use kind of a supercomputer or cluster computers to run some simulation code and generate the data and store this data in somehow shared space, the disk space. And later on, this will be retrieved back to another kind of high performance computers for doing some analysis, like extracting some information, doing the image processing, doing the segmentation, or extracting more features, and generating some visualization so that in the end, human analysts can actually take a look. But this is actually very difficult because the storing everything to disk is, again, this is the bottleneck. So in situ processing, basically try to merge this into very, very close systems so that they are not using the shared disk. Either they use like some portions of the system as a simulation, the other portion will be used as visualization or analysis so that they can actually connect it using very fast network so that they can get rid of this like intermediate bottleneck of data movement so that in the end, only the small size data will be passed down to the final human observer. So this bottleneck is very, very small. So this is one idea. And also there's another idea, but actually very similar and share the same idea. So Hans-Peter Pfister at Harvard University gave a keynote speech at the NVIDIA GTC, and he also mentioned so-called high throughput computing. So the high throughput computing is basically trying to use high performance computing in the middle between the sensors or imaging device and the human, so that all the data are actually not, raw data are not delivered to the human, but they are somehow pre-processed so that only important information will be delivered to the final observer. So there is very fast network between sensors or imaging device to the computing clusters. Even they can actually place at the same site, and maybe there will be some feedback loop so that we can image some portions of the data and we pre-process that and give some feedback to the sensors or imaging device so that we can find some more important information from the data set. And by doing that, we are not actually moving large data as a raw data to the final analysis. So this is a so-called high throughput computing pipeline. So for two cases like in situ processing or high throughput computing, they have some commons. For example, the idea is that they try to keep up with the imaging or data generation ratio with the computing, which means they try to overlap the computation with the acquisition so that we can actually make all kind of the real-time or online processing. As the data acquired or data generated, then the computation can happen at the same time without any waiting. So that's actually a core idea. So in our lab, actually, we have developed algorithms and interactive systems that tackles these problems. And the direction that we actually thought about was actually using first high-performance computing architectures. For example, mainly our approach was focused on using multi-core or GPU or even distributed systems, so that basically we leverage parallel system to make it faster. So that's the idea. And as you can see here, the recent top 500 list, which is the world's fastest supercomputer list. As you can see here, more than half of those have the accelerators like NVIDIA GPUs, which means these days these parallel systems are getting more like hybrid. So it's not like single CPU-based clusters, but it's more like including accelerators like GPUs, or for machine learning, they include the TPUs, or they can include even more like programmable processors. So leveraging those like parallel architectures, high performance systems is one direction that we are pursuing. The other direction that we are interested in these days is actually using deep learning. So people usually think deep learning is actually making like good result or making something doing automatic based on the data, right? But in our lab, we also think this deep learning can be used as a really fast accelerator. So one example that I'm showing you here is the MRI. Usually taking MRI is actually a slow process. So if you go to hospital and take MRI of your whole body MRI or something like this, then usually it takes like long time, like 30 minutes or 15 minutes, which means the patient should stay still, should not move at all for that long time. So imaging takes a really long time usually in the MRI. So the acquisition could be slow in conventional MRI, but the reconstruction can be very fast because this is the frequency data directly from MRI, and getting the image from this frequency data is simply applying the inverse Fourier transform. So this could be fast, and the quality can be also good, okay? But the acquisition could be slow. So people thought about, why don't we just take only a few samples and apply inverse Fourier transform, which means acquisition time can be reduced because we only partially sampled the data. So the reconstruction can be fast as well. However, the quality is not really good because we have some missing information. So definitely we have some noise and we have some artifacts here. So there exists some another research direction, which is so-called a compressed sensing. So the idea is that, well, if we sample only small fraction of the original signal, but there might be a way that we can reconstruct the image or signal which is very close to the ground truth, as long as the sampling follows some kind of constraint, and also we can solve some kind of minimization problem, as you can see here. So in this case, we have very fast acquisition, and we have a better quality. Here I said not best, but better, because this is very similar to the full reconstruction, but not exactly. But if you involved in this numerical process here, then the reconstruction can be very slow, okay? So we think that deep learning can actually jump into this situation so that this computation can be actually totally replaced by one-way feed-forward deep learning process. So in this case, acquisition can be fast, reconstruction can be fast, and also quality is also best. So this is another point of view that our research in deep learning so that we can make it faster. Today's talk, I'll actually talk about 3 examples that we have done in our lab in the past related to this topic. So we're going to talk about how we can make this computing fast. And also we're going to talk about how we can make this computing not only fast, but easier. I'm going to talk about why easier is important here later. And we're going to also talk about how we can make it computing smarter. So those are 3 topics we're going to talk about. So first, making computing faster. This is actually done by our collaborators, Ross Whitaker at Utah, and Dr. Sumin Hong, one of my students who graduated, and Dr. Kang Jeong. And here, I'm going to talk about how we can make algorithm faster using GPU and pair program architecture. So here, this is well-known Moore's law. Everybody knows this graph. So the transistors count actually doubles every 2 years and getting faster. So this doesn't mean that the transistor is getting faster, but we can actually leverage more transistors. But still, the performance is not going up quite a bit. So only way that we can improve the performance is actually leveraging the parallelism. So we can increase the number of cores with the same number of transistors, and basically we can leverage the performance better. So idea is that these days we use multi-cores or massive pair architectures or even distributed systems to make it faster. And this is a GPU architecture. So as you can see here, GPU has many, many small cores. So these days, like the most recent NVIDIA architecture has even more than 10,000 cores. So even though this is different from CPU cores, each core can do some computation, right? Floating point computation, integer computation. So this architecture is best for a data parallel processing where we can process each single input independently without communication. So one direction that we pursued in the past was actually making a numerical computation faster. And one example that I want to introduce here today is a distance transform. So here, distance transform is basically computing the distance from a given source. For example, here, the red dot here, center, is the starting point. And if we use isotropic speed, then starting from this point, you can think of a wave propagated from this source. If we plot the equidistance point, for example, iso contours from this starting point, then if we think about the Euclidean distance from the center, then the iso contour will be like a circular shape. If you think about the weighted distance, where depending on the direction and point position, we have this different propagation speed, then we will get this very curvy boundary iso contours depending on how you define this weight, right? So this is actually modeled mathematically, so-called using Hamilton-Jacobi equation. So here H is a Hamiltonian defined by the gradient of the distance field. And this is as equal to a speed, 1 over f. F here is the speed. And we have the boundary. So this is a boundary value formulation given the Hamiltonian. And Hamiltonian can be either simple like a gradient, inner product of the gradient, or maybe we can use a tensor in between so that we can define the anisotropic speed. And the way that we can solve this numerical problem is definitely using a discretization and iterative method. So people use so-called the discretization. This is very special way of discretizing the given domain, so-called garden of upwind discretization, because the solution is only depending on the upwind neighbors in the distance field. So only using one of the neighbors instead of using both neighbors. It's like using forward or backward difference. And there are well-known algorithms solving this problem. So this is actually very similar to the distance shortest path problem. in the computer science. So for example, the Dijkstra algorithm in computer science, graph shortest path problem. This is a single pass algorithm, label setting algorithm, and basically using some kind of sorted data structure like heap to update one by one. And the similar idea is used to solve this Hamilton-Jacobi equation. The algorithm is so-called fast marching method. So it's developed by Setien. And another type of algorithm is actually iterative or in graph shortest path algorithm, this Bellman-Ford algorithm. So it's so-called label correcting algorithm. So basically updating the entire grid until all of them converges. So this is also the algorithm so-called fast sweeping method. So this is also one idea that actually using this label correcting algorithm to solve this Hamilton-Jacobi equation. So let me show you one example of fast marching method here graphically. So here, basically, this is actually same as Dijkstra. So we have actually three groups. One is the accepted, which is actually upwind, which is the regions where the waves already pass through. And we have also intermediate region where this is so-called active list, or I would say that this is the heap. And the rest of the region, which is marked in gray, is not accepted or not visited yet. So we have these three different regions, and fast marching method, which is basically same as Dijkstra algorithm, is updating one point at a time. For example, here, this number is showing you the distance in this active list. So we pick the smallest distance among them and growing outwards this active list. Okay, and the next thing is actually number 2. So pick this one and growing up. So as you can see here, we need somehow a sorted data structure so that we can somehow make the order of the points in this active list. And second of all, as you can see here, one point should be updated at a time. Multiple points cannot be updated. So intrinsically, this is a serial algorithm. Compared to this, actually, we proposed so-called fast iterative method. So this is the algorithm that we proposed to solve the same Hamilton-Jacobi equation problem. But the idea is that we try to leverage parallelism so that we can update the active points, multiple points at the same time. So the idea is that whenever we have these yellow points, then all these yellow points can be updated at the same time. So actually, we developed this algorithm based on the idea that we can actually run this algorithm on parallel machine GPUs or multi-core CPUs, so that multiple thread can update these yellow points at the same time. So if we do this, then definitely this cannot solve the solution that in just one pass, because we are basically violating the correct order, right? But the idea is that we adaptively update this active list, but we allow a reactivation, which means these points can be activated or reactivated or deactivated multiple times until they are converged. But the idea is that we are not updating the entire grid, but we are updating only the subset, the partial subset of the grid in a way that only necessary points can be updated. So this is the idea. And as you can see on this video, left one is fast marching, right one is fast iterative method. As you can see here, fast marching method, basically the algorithm updates single point at a time. But the fast iterative method updates multiple points at the same time. So the propagation is much faster. But as you can see here, they are not actually representing the correct boundary for any given time, but eventually they will actually converge to the correct solution. So based on this idea, we actually use parallel hardware, for example, GPU, to update this active list in parallel. So this is actually block FIM, which means we split the domain into multiple sub blocks like tiles, and each tile is mapped to a single computing unit on the GPU. For example, NVIDIA GPU is so-called warp. So a single warp can have up to 32 threads running in parallel. So we can group 16 or 32 points at the same time and make a group and just assign it as a single updating unit for the GPU. So you can think of this single block as a single point on the CPU. So the block extension can be actually run on the GPU very well. And also one problem of our algorithm FIM was that we ignore the correct updating order and we're relying on the multiple update, which means maybe depending on the input speed map, some points may be updated many times because we may violate this updating rule. So many times this wave can actually going back and touching this point multiple times. So another idea that we developed was a so-called group ordered FIM. Here, the idea is that, well, we are updating the block anyway. Maybe we can make a very coarse order depending on this block. So which means if we compute the per pixel or per node distance, then this will be very expensive. But if we have a group of pixels like blocks, then the block distance can be computed very fast if we use coarser grid. So the idea is that we have two different levels of computation. One is using a coarse grid for making the block update order, which means we have a sequence of updating order, which means in this example, the center block is the first block that we need to update. Then number 2, these 4 blocks can be updated later. And this number 3 can be updated later, something like this. So this is based on the per block distance, as you can see here. So running FIM on very coarse grid once, this can be done very fast. And pre-assign this order of the updating sequence, and then we use this sequence to update. By doing that, actually, we can minimize the reactivation quite a bit. So let me show you some examples here. So this is actually showing you a GPU performance. So this FIM algorithm is compared with the single CPU fast marching method, which is the worst case optimal algorithm, Dijkstra-based algorithm. And depending on the input speed, sometimes we can get like more than 100 times speed up. If the input speed is really complicated like this, then maybe we have less speed up, but still it's quite a bit compared to the CPU. And this is a scalability test on shared memory system. In this case, we use NUMA system with 4 CPUs. Each CPU has 8 cores, so we can use up to 32 cores. And we tested with the 3D grid, 256 cube grid. And as you can see here, this is the relative speed over single-threaded fast marching method. So fast marching method is the baseline, and measure how fast we can get by using this multiple thread. So x-axis is the number of thread, y-axis is the relative speed up. If the problem or input is very simple like this, like constant speed, then our method FIM can be up to 90 times faster than the single-threaded fast marching method when we use 32 threads. The other more complicated case, this like a vanilla FIM is not the fastest one, but if you use like group ordered FIM, then this actually surpass the other state-of-the-art parallel algorithm. So reach at least 30 or 40 times like relative speed up compared to the fast marching method. And this graph also shows you what the effect of the group order. So comparison with the vanilla FIM and group order FIM. So in the previous slide, I explained that the group order is basically assigning the block level order using coarser resolution distance computation. So by doing that, for example, like example 3, like this case, this is the average number of update, which means this is not the time, but total number of update, which means, as you can see here, fast marching method, this is the Dijkstra-based method. Total number of update is just the same because they use a heap. So they use only the minimum number of update. But our case, this can increase up to like close to 20. So which means single pixel need to be updated 20 times. So this is even much higher than the fast matching method. But if we use group order algorithm, then we can reduce this down to only 3.5. So this is actually much smaller than this one. And also we'll see that the performance actually increased quite a bit. So here, this is actually reducing the number of updates. So very impressive. Total time is not like this because total time include everything. So in order to do this, we have to do like course level distance computation as well. So those can be somehow like overhead. So if we include everything, we can still have the benefit here, right? So we can have like twice faster. And this one actually shows you another like example here. Actually, example one is very simple case. In this case, even though we are using group order algorithm, we are not saving anything because in this case, the original FIM is very efficient. So in this case, actually, we are not making anything faster, right? But other than that, if we have some more complicated cases, definitely we have some benefit by using this algorithm. And the next idea that we tried was that, well, so far we tried this algorithm on the single GPU and multi-threaded CPU. And the next step is why don't we split it to multiple GPUs? So basically distributed, the shared memory system, but multiple GPUs. So why don't we just make it more parallel by using multiple GPUs? So the idea is that we have a computational domain. And what we want to do is that we want to actually distribute the data and we share the domain. However, we split the computation, which means each GPU is only computing, in this case, 1/4, okay? Then the idea is that how can you split the data? So that's a question. But if you look at the case, in our case, actually, we are using so-called very, very narrow active list like a band, which means the entire domain is not being updated, but we only use very, very narrow thin band to update, which means the computation is only restricted to this band, which means the domain decomposition is split the domain has to be different from conventional approach, which means this is actually conventional domain decomposition method where the domain is explicitly split by 1/4 and distributed in this way. If we have an active list in this way, then this yellow line is the task size. So if we are lucky, then as you can see here, roughly like 1/4 of the active list will be assigned to every GPU. So this is actually good load balance and extremely happy case. But there might be a case because the active list can grow or shrink and multiple activation, reactivation is allowed. So which means this band shape or location is not known in advance, which means there may be a case that some of them is actually on some domain, but the other domain, they are not actually no overlap like this. So in this case, load balancing is terribly bad. So only 2 GPUs are being used, and they are also not sharing equally. Only one is using 60%, the other is using 40%, something like this. So which means the problem that we need to solve in this case is that how can we split the domain dynamically so that when we growing out or shrink this active list, we can assign the domain in a way that the task is always assigned more or less equally. So that's the main idea. So dynamic split domain as active list grows. So that's the main idea. And because each subdomain handles a sub-active list independently, we never know what will be the next iteration because we cannot see the entire list. So we relying on some of the algorithm. For example, we use some kind of history-based prediction so that, well, next iteration, my list will be size something like this. If I'm shrinking, then basically I need to assign less number of points. If my active list is growing, then basically I'm assigning more points, something like this. So basically, depending on the local active list size predicted by the history, I dynamically assign this domain. Okay. And the second idea is that while we are doing that, we need to minimize the communication between GPUs. Even though we split the domain, whenever we do a computation on this boundary, we need the value nearby the GPU. So there should be some kind of communication. So when we assign this domain in different GPUs, we try to minimize this overlap or boundary. So this is another rule that we need to follow. So this is the result. As you can see here, this is the like static decomposition along one dimension, 3D only one split, 3D multiple split, and this is the dynamic split in our algorithm. And the graph shows you that single curve is a single GPU. So in this example, we use up to 8 different GPUs, and x-axis is number of iterations, which means as an iteration goes, for example, this curve, this GPU is getting more task, but not, in the end, task is reduced, and converged, something like this. Because the active list will be at the beginning, will be just a single point, but it will be growing out. So the band size is growing. And once you cover the entire region, then band size will be reduced, right? So the curve will be like this. And the best curve is actually they are very close to each other, which means the task distribution is more or less uniform. So as you can see here, our algorithm can distribute this task very well compared to the other static algorithm. And this is the scalability test. As you can see here, this is number of devices, number of GPUs, and we compare the different domain decomposition strategies, right? And how much the performance will grow, right? So depending on different input condition, different speed map, we roughly get 6 to 7 speed up when we use 8 GPUs. So we think this is actually quite good scalability because, I mean, 8 times the scalar speed up might be the best, right? But usually there are many communications between GPUs. So this is actually, we believe, the good performance. All right, and let me move on to the next topic. So next topic is actually making visual computing easier. So also this is done by many collaborators, students, my students, and also David and Hans-Peter Fischer at Harvard University. So the idea of this research direction is how we can make a system that we can do a leverage GPU or pair processing better. So let me show you this. So this is the popular programming language list from IEEE Spectrum. So I'm the member of IEEE Society, so I get this IEEE Spectrum magazine every month. And actually, I found this ranking. So one is from July 2014, and the other one is last year, July 2020. And this is a popular programming language. So if you look at this, then 2014, the top one was Java, and the second one is C, and third is C++, Python, okay? And interestingly, this year, Python, and not this year, last year, Python becomes number 1, okay? So which means maybe Python is now the best popular, most popular language here. But also interesting thing is that in this top 10 list, there's something like R or MATLAB, right? Something like this. So what is it? So these are actually, well, it's kind of language, right? But doing some kind of some specific task, right? So these are not general purpose language. So the idea that I brought up this popular language is something like this. So if one wants to use, for example, GPUs in their research, okay, or GPU clusters, and try to make a fast program and do some visualization, then what we need to do is that we need to know those. For example, main code has to be written C++ or Python, and 3D rendering has to be done by using OpenGL or some other graphics API. GPU computing usually is done by CUDA or OpenCL, and multi-threaded programming has to be done by implemented using OpenMP, right? And distributed computing has to be implemented using MPI or Hadoop or Spark or something like this, which means if one is not the computer science experts, then it's very difficult to understand and use all of this, right? But the scientists that we usually work together, they only want to make research code really fast, right? So they want to focus on their problem only, and they don't want to spend time to dig into like OpenMP, for example. Okay. So they want to use HP system, but they don't want to use actually actual low-level programming. So that's why we proposed so-called domain-specific language, which is a DSL here. So domain-specific language is the computer language specialized to a particular application domain. And I grabbed this article from Communications of ACM this year. Here I found that actually this article is not about the DSL, it's about the Moore's law. Actually, the article is saying that the Moore's law is almost over, but basically these days we have hybrid like architectures or very specialized architectures. So domain-specific language is the way to go, which means domain-specific language for some performance-sensitive parts of the application is actually good. It's not slow, but actually fast, because domain-specific language can handle those very specific tasks much better than general purpose language. So that was the article point of view. So I agree with this point of view, because if you look at this, one axis is ease of use and the other is flexibility. Then domain-specific language is actually easy to use, but much better than using turnkey system, which is already all implemented, but less flexible, or some programming libraries that still require some knowledge of programming, right? So DSL is in between. So the first system that I'm going to introduce you is actually name is Vivaldi. So Vivaldi actually, when we first developed this system, we tried to make a very nice name, but it was very difficult. So right before submitting the paper, actually, we came up with this name. So the Vivaldi is actually short form of visualization language for distributed system, not the musician, okay? But not a composer. But Vivaldi is developed to provide a actually domain-specific system language and system for basically GPU clusters. Because at the time when we first developed the system, when we want to use GPU clusters, then we need to learn how to use like MPI and how to use CUDA and do some kind of manual communication using MPI and CUDA, right? So it's too much of work. So we proposed the Vivaldi, which is like this. This is the example of the Vivaldi code, which is very similar to Python. Actually, we just copied the Python context grammar, except very similar special cases like this. So we introduced a very special grammar here so that we can extend the Python. So this is the actual image generated by this code. Only few lines of code, we can generate a maximum intensity projection volume rendering like this. So the idea is that we have a Python-like code, then the system can translate and decompose into either main function or domain-specific function or CUDA function, and basically generate different code, and task scheduler is distributing these tasks. Basically, the system is handling this. So I'm just briefly skim over these details, right? So they are all in the paper. So this is the execution model where we add these to extend so that we can add some functions, right? And one idea that we propose in this domain-specific language is that this is the parallelization language, which means we want to make the parallelization very easy. So the idea is that we simply define how to split the data, and the system can do the parallelization, which means either we can split the input or split the output or combine together. Then the system will actually do this, the parallelization automatically for you. So these are actually input split, output split, in and out split, two cases. But if you look at this, actually there are some certain types of tasks, visualization task or computing task fits very well to these types of parallelism. So this is like an abstraction that we provided. And Also, Vivaldi provides a memory model, which means multi-GPUs can communicate automatically by just doing this. Let me quickly skip this because it looks like I'm running out of time. And this is also one domain-specific function that we propose. So the idea is that we propose some kind of iterator. So iterator is actually working on some that like a data vector, right? But we propose iterator for line, plane, or even like perspective iterator for specialized for like volume rendering or sampling on 2D or 3D data. Okay. So that's what we proposed. So let me show you some result. So this is an example of Vivaldi code, and this is the result of rendering, and this is computation results. So we tested with the various image processing tasks, like or computation tasks, and we tested some scalability here. So we reached like up to 10 or 11.9 for 12 GPUs. Okay. And we applied this system to generate large-scale visualization. So this is actually first, I believe this is the first paper actually introduced the whole zebrafish data set in the connectomics. So David actually is the main author of this paper, and he actually generated the multi-terabyte, close to 5 terabyte electron microscopy data. And we used our Vivaldi system to generate all the visualization here. So for example, here we did a like terabyte scale volume rendering together with the neuron rendering here, or arbitrarily cross-sectional view, or even following some arbitrary curve to make a like cross-sectional view of this three-dimensional data, which is very difficult to use just simple conventional 3D array. Okay, so the next, we proposed Vivaldi, and now we thought about, well, what's the next? And if you think about the big data process, then usually people think of MapReduce. These days, I mean, MapReduce is not as before, but still people use Hadoop and Spark for extremely large data processing, for example, like web crawling data. And the idea is that this MapReduce is very, very simple programming model where the user only defines the map function and reduce function. Then the system will do the automatic like sorting, like shuffling, and also combining them together to generate the result. So it's a very simplified programming model. So there are some cases that this model fits very, very well. But what we did is, well, why don't we extend Vivaldi to Spark? Because Vivaldi was actually handwritten, actually written from scratch, everything using Python. So we use MPI and we use CUDA and we use PyCUDA and everything, so that PyMPI, and we build the system from scratch. So it works well, but in order to make it even scalable, then maybe it would be nicer to use already existing systems like Spark or Hadoop. And we actually use Spark because Spark is not only a MapReduce system, but also it provides some other functions like filters or like streaming. So we use a Spark and we extend our system so that we use Spark system. So idea is that we actually make our Vivaldi system compatible with a Spark all-DD, resilient distributed data set, so that we can communicate with Spark implicitly. So user does not know whether using Spark or Vivaldi, but actually code is working transparently on the Spark system. So the idea is that extending this RDD, and this is an example of a Spark system. So as you can see here, this is actually very similar again to a Python, and actually this is very similar to a PySpark. So Spark wrapper, Python wrapper of Spark. So we added a new extension here, like new tag or like a VMap. So PySpark, there exists like a map instead of VMap, but we added a VMap, so a VSpark map, right? So, and also like a dot something, which is actually used in VSpark, Vivaldi. So we added only very, very small extension to PySpark so that we can run everything on the Spark system. So roughly speaking, comparing to a naive Spark, we can get huge speed up. Actually, this makes sense because if you think about the Spark, even though Spark provide in-memory like processing, which means the memory can reside on this like CPU memory, this is basically a batch processing system, and the main communication is usually done by a shared disk system. So it's not a fast system. So our system can really fast. So like up to 68 times faster for very simple filtering, and k-means clustering case, we have up to 14 times faster, something like this. However, one limitation of this Spark is that we cannot use this for rendering. As you can see here, if we do the distributed rendering using Spark, then rendering single frame takes like 3 minutes. So basically it's unusable. Main reason is that the Spark has some kind of lots of Java virtual machine overhead. So as you can see, as this orange yellow part is all the overhead. So even though we reduce some communication and reduce the computation, this overhead dominates. So next, what we did is that why don't we actually propose a much faster, lighter system that we can leverage the GPU in-memory processing, which means the Spark use in-memory processing on the CPU side. We propose a GPU side in-memory processing when we use Spark, which means once the data is loaded on the GPU side, that this can be reused multiple times on the GPU without coming back and forth between CPU and GPU. So that's the main idea. So we propose this work, and later on we extend this to even for a visualization application, which means, so our goal was that we really wanted to do the distributed rendering using Spark, okay? But the 3 minutes per frame doesn't make any sense. So we try to reduce the overhead as much as possible. And we change all the communication to GPU direct communication. So GPU can directly communicate with the other GPUs using MPI direct. So by doing that, as you can see here, we can have so-called in-situ processing is also possible, which means computation and rendering can be done on the same node using Spark, okay, without data moving in and out using shared distributed disk. And more interestingly, we made distributed rendering using Spark really fast. So here we make single frame rendering time is 2.4 seconds. So if you think about the real-time rendering, then, well, this is not really fast, right? But comparing to like batch processing Spark, 2.4 seconds per frame is really fast. So let me show you some video demo. So this is a real-time video of rendering of this deep water impact data set. As you can see here, this is more than 100 gigabyte data set. We use 128 distributed blocks on the Spark, and user interactively change the transfer function, and the screen is updated less than 3 seconds. So this is not real time, but we think this is usable, right? So this is very useful when we want to combine some kind of computation using Spark and the visualization together. So let me skip a case. For example, this is a case where the IFS surface computation and rendering can be done together, like in situ fashion. And this is a large scale, like fractal data visualized in real time. All right, let me move on to the last topic. So last topic is about deep learning. So this topic is also done by many collaborators, mainly with my current students and David. And actually I have 3 topics here, but I'm gonna speed up. So challenges in deep learning is basically, if you have a training data, then basically you can do that. But making training data is usually very difficult, right? Making labeling is difficult. So our solution is actually either using self-supervision or using some kind of weak annotation labels or using some kind of human mimicking like process. So actually, I made too many slides. So let me briefly skip this. So first topic is about image denoising, where removing some kind of noise happening in this very specific example, electron microscopic case, we have some kind of very strange noise like burning tissues or like some kind of transport film noise. So we don't have a ground truth. So the idea is that we use somehow similar to cycle GAN so that we can match noisy image and clean image, but vanilla cycle GAN doesn't work because there are so many different kind of combinations we can make. So we combine this with so-called supervised learning case. But the question is, we don't have any supervised learning data because it's this unpaired case. So idea is that why don't we use self-supervision, which means we make a fake label, like a pseudo label, using it as a supervised learning, okay? So details can be found in the paper. So idea is that similar to cycle GAN to make a pair between noise and clean domain, but we have a supervised noise extractor, and they are combined together like a chaining. So we learn like in a cooperative way. So we get this is the error, as you can see here. Our method is much lower error compared to the other state-of-the-art method, and compared to cycle GAN, vanilla cycle GAN, our method is much better. And also model size. X-axis is the number of parameters of the deep learning model. Y-axis is the PSNL. So higher the better. So our method is much smaller parameters and much better PNSL. And the next is image segmentation. So yes, we have a same thing. We have labels that we can train using deep learning, and we can do the segmentation. Okay, so this is what we did before, but making this label is very difficult. So the algorithm that we proposed last year is, well, why don't we use only a few scribbles instead of full labels? For example, here we users just draw like curvy scribbles like this. Then the algorithm can learn the label automatically, right? So this is so-called self-supervision or weak supervision. And the idea is that from those very, very small scribbles, we can learn the fake label. So again, pseudo label. And using pseudo label, we train the network and over again. Then the pseudo label is actually improving over time. So that's the main idea. So warming up phase, we have input scribbles and train this cross entropy loss. And then using this, we generate kind of a pseudo label where the red part is like a low probability, white part is high probability. So we only pick the higher probability pixels and use this as pseudo label and like this, training the network, okay? Then it will actually grow and improve, okay, over time. So by doing that, actually our method can generate much better performance without the full label. So this is actually very useful for like a connectome case as well, because previously we need to make a full label to train a supervised learning, but now we don't need the full label. We only need a few scribbles. And this is the last topic. So instance segmentation. So I grabbed this image from somebody else's presentation. So instance segmentation is actually this one. So object detection is detecting each object like using bounding box. Semantic segmentation is separating like a person's or background. Instance segmentation is labeling each different object, like one person's, second person, third person, like this, right? So this is so-called instance segmentation, and we propose a instance segmentation algorithm here because connectomics research instance segmentation is also important. So I grabbed this image from CREMI. We generate this image from CREMI data set. As you can see here, different color is different instance or different neuron. So we have to separate these different neurons in different ID or index. So the current method, either detecting one by one or using some intermediate predictions, but the main idea we propose here is the based on the graph coloring. So actually, Tuan, who's the first author of this paper, will be presenting this work next week, actually, at CBPL next week. The main idea is that we actually treat segmentation as graph coloring. So if the pixels belong to the same object, then they have to be assigned the same color. If they belong to different objects, then assign different colors. So we build a graph and we assign different colors. So basically, that's the idea. And how can you assign color? We use so-called a kind of reinforcement learning. So basically, we treat this like decision process. So iteratively decide whether my color is same as my neighbor's colors. By looking at my edges, basically make a decision. So this is so-called action in the reinforcement learning. So we define this action so that we can split different object in different color. And the interesting idea we propose here is that whenever we make a decision, we generate the binary decision, either 0 or 1, which means at the first, we have only 2 labels, it's 0 or 1. But next, we have 4 labels because 2 to the power of 2. Next, we have 8 labels, 2 to the power of 3. So basically, per each iteration, we generate the binary image and combine them together, and each pixel becomes assigned a single label, okay? So this is the idea. And I'm gonna skip this reward. Hopefully, you can actually come to our talk next week at the CBPR. So idea is actually assigning this color. So yes, so we try this on Cremi data set, and what we can what we think the nice idea here is that algorithm scales well. So idea here is that where there is a 16 counts of the object, 24 counts of the objects, 65, and this is average running time. Our case, running time does not actually increase quite a bit, right? But different algorithm, for example, they grow quite a bit. And for example, asynchronous algorithm, they even cannot actually do this for this amount of objects. So in terms of scalability, our algorithm works very well. And we also tested on a very famous Kitty data set like this, okay? And the last video here, we tested on 3D EM segmentation as well. Although this is kind of preliminary result, we can see that we can apply this algorithm to 3D connectome data set as well, okay? All right, so conclusion. So in this talk, actually, I introduced our research in our lab, which is actually towards a faster, easier, and smarter visual computing for data-intensive sciences. So I think in the future, data will keep growing, okay? This trend will continue. So maybe focus on some more advanced parallel computing or high-performance computing architecture like heterogeneous computing or some specialized hardware, something like programmable hardware or like TPU for deep learning, right? So focus on those, leveraging those hardwares would be interesting. So developing domain-specific programming language would be interesting. And also, I think AI can be also a fast numerical computations, like replacing the kind of iterative numerical computation in the future. So we are very interested in developing a beyond the supervised learning. So without any supervised data set, how can we train the network? And also mimicking human behavior is another interesting direction that we can think of, because connecting process, there are significant amount of human has to be in the loop, right? Efforts has to be in the loop. So if we can make some algorithms mimicking this human behavior, that would be very interesting for connectomics research. All right, and actually during the talk, I was not able to introduce all of my work with the collaborators. For example, Jeff Lichtman, Wei, Alan Lee, Markus Hadwiger, Johanna Bayer. Those are all very, very important people that I worked with in the past. So I appreciate all of your support. And also I give special thanks to my students who provide me some kind of slide material for helping me to make this slide. All right, so this is the funding of my research, and thank you very much. This is the end of my talk. If you have any questions, let me know.
Thank you very much, Won-Ki, for the really wonderful keynote talk. I really enjoyed it. It was a really nice overview, both broad and deep at the same time. Very enjoyable and very impressive work. Thank you very much. If you have questions, please post them in the YouTube chat or in the Discord chat. We can take some questions. So maybe I start with one or two. So I'm wondering, so we are doing all of these really nice big software engineering projects. How do you deal with all this effort? So I mean, you make it easy for other people to use GPUs and heterogeneous systems and so on. But what you have to do in your group and so on is a huge effort. So how do you deal with this? And also, what are your preferences of APIs, and how do you teach your students, and how do you manage all of this heterogeneity in the development effort?
Yeah, so actually this development of this big system is really a not easy task. So actually the Vivaldi system, the first like DSL that we propose at VIS, that was actually developed me and one of my students. So, but the system is actually quite a huge system, because his system provide like compilers and runtime system and everything. So really thank and appreciate the effort that my student actually devoted to make the system. So first of all, this requires really a talent to make this really nice system. And also the one has to enjoy this, doing this. For example, for me, if I recall, maybe Markus, you share the same idea, same thinking, but when I was a student, actually, I really enjoyed doing some OpenGL like programming, and whenever the new OpenGL spec came out, then just finding the documentations and try to use those and implement new algorithms using like experimental driver or something like this. So you have to actually enjoy this to make this really big systems. And as for like a training or teaching, so yes, I mean, to make someone who is really well experienced in this way, teaching is very important, right? But to be honest, actually, in the regular lecture, teaching in that depth is actually very difficult. So to make the system like this, actually, we have to work really hard, actually, outside the class and just do the research and spend quite a bit of effort. So that's what I can say.
Yeah. No, it's a really huge effort. So there's a question in the chat by Marco Agus. He says, "Thank you for the inspiring talk, Won-Ki. I would like to know if the new data related to human connectome is available, and if you will release the code for Kala LR."
Oh yeah, sure. So I think the human connectome for the data set, actually, I'm not the one who is generating data, so I cannot say anything for that. But I know that I think H01 data from Harvard, right? The Lichtman's lab data is actually released in public. So this petabyte data that I mentioned earlier in the talk. So I think you can download it, or you can at least contact Jeff Lichtman's labs, or maybe Markus, you know this, I don't know. And as for the code of Color LR, actually Color RL, yes, this is actually open source, and we already released this to GitHub code. So I'm pretty sure that this is available for download. So if you cannot find it, let me know. So send me the email. If you cannot find the link, then I can send you the link.
Okay, there's another question by Peter Rautek. He says,
okay,
on which level of generality do you think new DSLs should be designed? Do you think that new DSLs should be general visualization DSLs, or do you think that new DSLs should target individual domain science domains like biology, physics, etc., or should they be on an even more specific level, like a DSL for astrophysics and another one for particle physics, etc.?
Yeah, actually, this is a question. So what we tried, for example, when we first developed Vivaldi, actually, we tried to make like a common denominator for some specific task. For example, parallel abstraction, for example, or iterators. Those can be used, for example, for graphics visualization, but also for something else. So if it is too specific to a certain task, then maybe it's not really usable for the other tasks. So you have to decide very well. So my suggestion or my choice would be maybe a little general, but it's not too general. Okay, so for example, specific to some kind of array-based processing for some certain visualization or distributed system or distributed computing, right? Something like this, supporting some biologists. If it is supporting biology, then there might be some functions that biologists, researchers commonly use, right? So maybe this could be the answer.
Okay, there's a question by Ronel Sickert. Do we still have time for this question?
Okay, so color R looks promising. Wondering if you tried on other types of data other than EM data. Yeah, so actually EM data, actually the main target was not EM. So the color R was purely a general segmentation algorithm. So that's why we tested on CBPPP data set or KD data set or something like basically common benchmark data set commonly used in computer vision. But we wanted to show that this also works for like medical or biological data as well. So we use some microscopic data and EM data as well. And interestingly, one of the reviewers actually was from, I'm pretty sure that he is from this connectomics or this research field. And he mentioned that it might be interesting to pursue more on this EM segmentation using this algorithm. So that's our direction for the next level. But to make a story short, actually color R is not only for EM, but can be a general segmentation algorithm.
Okay, thank you. So I think we're out of time. Yeah, so you can post more questions and keep discussing in the chats after the talk. And thank you very much for attending, everyone. And especially, of course, thank you very much so much again to Won-Ki for a wonderful keynote talk. Thank you very much. The next session will start at 11 Central European time. Thank you.